somebody who wants to do a job for a period of time, and when they either get tired of it or they see an opportunity that can help them to earn a little bit more, they're going to jump ship, as opposed to really investing in the time and effort that's put into training them and getting them up to that point. That you've been here maybe even longer than I have, but here I am, I'm in this position now. Let me tell you what I want to see here. Let me tell you what I think this could be. Yep. And kind of give them the space to walk through that with me.
Welcome to Manufacturing Insiders. I have Josh Liegel with me today. He is the president and CEO of EIC Solutions. They are a manufacturer of solid state cooling devices that really protect electronics in some very rugged conditions. Some pretty awesome applications, which I think we're going to hear about today. I think Josh is a really interesting person to talk to from a couple different perspectives. One of them that I'm really interested in talking about is his methodology and kind of mindset as he moved from literally the bottom of the totem pole at the company there to CEO and president over the course of 21 years. And I just think it's a really impressive story. So welcome to Manufacturing Insiders, Josh.
Thanks, Nate. It's good to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. And, one thing I don't always do, but I feel like I should do it more, is just kind of introduce the concept of this podcast and why we're doing this. I feel like it's really important to use every tool at our disposal to build manufacturing in the U.S. And, there's a lot of talk and a lot of effort behind that today. But I think the one thing where there's a little bit of a gap is in leaders in manufacturing sharing insights and knowledge. What's working from a marketing standpoint, from a hiring standpoint, from a culture standpoint. And so I think it's really cool to just hear it straight from the horse's mouth, essentially, and hear what a leader has to say about those topics. So that being said, how did you manage to move from, just kind of an entry-level position at the company to CEO? I don't know if you can even summarize that, but there's the question.
So people ask me that question a lot because it's a very uncommon story, especially in today's day and age. I think a lot of people look to move from position to position by jumping companies, and that's fair. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. A lot of people talk about that, but when I was coming up in this company, I had a lot of personal circumstances that really required me to kind of stick around and stay where I was put because of the stability of the job. And so I wanted to stick around just solely for that, but I didn't really want to just stick around and do what I was doing. I wanted to do more. And oftentimes you don't get that opportunity because you're too busy doing what you're doing.
Right.
And maybe you get boosted up within a department or something. But what I regularly tried to do was just make myself more valuable to the company. As long as I was here and I was sticking around, I might as well learn more things that maybe were outside of my specific area of expertise and take on things that would help people who are above me to loosen the load for them and kind of get things moving in that direction. So I kept making myself more valuable to the company through skill sets, and then also just kept basically grinding. I mean, it is one of those things. 21 years doesn't go by that quickly day to day. Looking back, of course, it's gone by quickly, but day to day, you're just figuring, okay, well, what am I going to do today? And it does at times feel like it's not going anywhere. It feels slow, but over time you start to see those things and people recognize that you're a team player and recognize that you're part of that. So I kept doing that, and that allowed me to be in line for positions that I think maybe I wouldn't have necessarily been in line for before if I had just sort of kept my head down and just only focused on the tasks that I was asked to do, but really sort of took things to new levels. And I also recognize that, maybe opportunities like that aren't available to everybody. There's not always bandwidth to do those things or availability, but I took every chance I could to learn new skills within our company and become more invaluable, so that there was a point where there was just an indispensable side to what I was doing that
Right.
No one else knew how to do what I was doing, and no one else was the one doing it. I would just do it myself. Even at times when they tried to get me to give up certain responsibilities, I always tried to keep a hand in it just to make sure that I made sure I knew what was going on so that I wouldn't, lose sight of that skill either. So.
Right. No, I think that's a great answer. And I mean, you're right that maybe those opportunities don't exist, at least visibly in some companies. But I think you and I can agree from a CEO perspective that if you do have that person that goes above and beyond and expands their their arena of their responsibilities and learns things that are really outside the scope of their responsibilities, you're gonna want to advance them because you're gonna want to keep them and whatever
Sure.
it's going to take to make them happy. So, from the general to the specific, what are some examples in those early days
Mhm.
of things that you learned or things that you did to kind of stand out?
Okay. So early on, when I was learning the products and sort of getting an understanding of what was happening here at the company and kind of how we sold things and what the functionalities were and what the specifics and getting in all the data, there was a bottleneck in the point of like, okay, well, we would get all this data and then we would have to submit it over to a different group, and that group would then take that data and analyze it and then kick it back to us. And sometimes that was taking 3-4 days to get done. And I decided like, well, hey, it would be a lot faster if I could just do that myself. So I started asking people like, would it be more helpful if I just took that away from you guys? So
Hmm.
I just started doing things like that, and they taught me how to do it. And it wasn't particularly difficult. It was just a little bit time consuming, but I had some bandwidth, and it was helping me to get back to my customers faster and helping me to get answers to them quicker. So I started doing it. And then the rest of the sales team basically just started sending them to me instead of sending them to the engineering group because I would get it done faster. So I started to learn those kinds of things. So just stepping into small areas that were, adjacent to the group I was in. I didn't come in sales and customer service and like try to go run operations. You know what I mean? Like I was
Right.
just, I could take on this thing because it was a customer facing task that needed to get done. And it just was taking a long time once it left our group. So being able to continue to do that faster is the kind of thing that led to other opportunities, because then people look to you as like a trusted person within the group.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a really smart approach. And I just wonder why more people don't take it. Is it a personal thing? Like, for example, is it your own intrinsic personality that drove you to kind of behave in that way? Or is it you looking at the company as a whole and realizing that you would eventually be rewarded for that effort? Or is it a mix? Like, what do you think?
Well, on the first side, like I think there is a personality side to it, right? Like I don't like to wait for
Yeah.
things when I can do them myself, and I also like to have a certain amount of control over the outcomes of what I'm doing. I don't want a negative outcome that's going to reflect directly on me to be the fault of somebody else. So I want to
Yeah.
be able to control as many things I can in that group.
Right.
But I think like culturally within companies and just even within society in general, we get very singularly focused on like, this is my job. This is, these are the things that don't ask me to do anything that's outside of my sort of responsibility set or whatever. And that can lead to a complacency within that group, that within yourself, that then people start to look at as like, well, this is the fault. I'm not being given more opportunities. I don't have the opportunities that I want here. And that's true. I mean, even here at this company over, 21 years, there were plenty of times where I didn't know if I was going to be rewarded for what I was doing. I didn't know if this was going to, this was never a career path for me. This wasn't like, if I start here, 15 years from now, I'm going to be the CEO. Like I didn't start out with that in mind. I
Right.
just kept pushing forward and saying, well, what little more can I do now? And that just, made me a little bit more valuable. But it didn't ever, occur to me that like this is where I would wind up. And I think
Hmm.
oftentimes, you see these larger companies and people like the idea of a larger company for many reasons, but one of them is, there's career tracks. There's like you can come on and you can, do this, and over after this much time, you'll get moved into this position and then you get moved into that position. And that's great, if that fits the model of what you're looking for. But I would really encourage people to look at the idea of getting involved in a smaller company, because in small companies your job is usually pretty expansive, and you cover a
Right.
lot of departments and you get to do a lot of different things. And that's a great way to get exposed to different areas that you wouldn't necessarily have. You're in a big company, you have a very defined skill set and a lot of work to do within that. If you
Right.
work at a small company, you have a very, very big amount of responsibilities and skills across many different disciplines that you're going to have a lot of work across all of those because there's lots to do and lots of hats to wear.
Right.
So I started to see that and just started to say, okay, well, let me just do that. And I felt like internally I wanted to do it. I thought it was more interesting than just doing the same thing day in and day out. But
Right.
also I felt like there was this potential for, well, if I'm going to go anywhere, it's not just going to be like one day I'm just going to have a skill set that I didn't realize I had. You know what I mean?
Right.
I was going to have to go out and get it. I wasn't going to be able to, no one was going to give it to me, waiting for the company to offer some sort of training or develop some sort of program that was going to let me rise to this new position or rise to this new skill set wasn't really going to happen unless
Yep.
I drove. So I
Yep.
had to say, okay, let me push a little harder. Let me get a little further in this without someone telling me it was time to or they needed me to do more.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really important point because there are a lot of people, employees that'll sit on the sidelines and essentially bitch that they don't have the opportunity or like nobody's giving them more responsibility or, a larger role. But I can't think of a single instance in my years of, managing employees that somebody's come to me and said, "Hey, Nate, I want to take this thing on. I think it's a great idea for the company and I want to take it on." There's never been a time where I said no. I mean,
Sure.
I may have shaped that a little bit, but I've never just flat out said no, and so it's pretty exciting when an employee does that. So when you kind of look at the employees that you have and you want to develop more people like you that have that sort of entrepreneurial mindset, um, how do you go about that? I mean, I would assume that there's probably a component to picking the right people when you're hiring them in the first place, kind of identifying some of those characteristics. But then you also need the mechanisms once they're in the company to facilitate it and to foster that sort of a mindset.
So, I mean, I will say again, in a small company, there's not always time or opportunity to do that. Sometimes you have the time and you need certain things done and you're like, hey, let's give, this person an opportunity to try and do this. But that doesn't always exist. That's
Right.
there, once in a while. And but I do think it boils down to your hiring process. It starts there because if you do not pick the right people, it doesn't matter how many opportunities you're going to have. They're not going to step into it, or they're going to overstep from day one, and that's all they're going to want to do is do things that's not within their job description or something.
Right.
So we try to always, when we're hiring here, we're big on culture hire. I can train most people to do the things they need to do. If they can show a basic skill set, we can train them to do more. We can teach them the products. We can get them to understand things. But you get somebody who has the right culture. They have the right fit for you from a personality standpoint. From you look at their resume and how they drive and do they stick around somewhere? Because that's something else we look at a lot is we see a lot of people who jump every 24 months.
Right.
They're out into a new job and a new company. And that's fine. Again, I don't understand everyone's personal situation and why that might occur. But that doesn't say to me this is somebody who wants to throw in and really grow within a company. That says that's somebody who wants to do a job for a period of time. And when they either get tired of it or they see an opportunity that can help them to earn a little bit more, they're going to jump ship as
Right.
opposed to really investing in the time and effort that's put into training them and getting them up to that point.
Right.
So we try to look at people who have a certain stick to it, kind of culture to them. People who have a like-mindedness when they come in, you can kind of feel it in the discussions you have. We talk about one of the big questions we always ask are what are your hobbies? Because if someone
Right.
has a certain skill set on paper, right, and they say, okay, I do these things professionally. I'm a salesperson, I'm a marketer, whatever it is. But then you say, what are your hobbies? And they start to say, oh, I love to work on cars. Well, that gives you a certain insight to the fact that they have some sort of a technical mind because they
Mhm.
wouldn't be able to work on cars if they couldn't do that.
Right.
If
Right.
they're like, I love nature, I love, great. Okay, you can start to see certain patterns that say, well, this is not just their professional skills. This is about their attitude and what they love to do and it's pretty funny when you ask people about their hobbies sometimes, and they get really excited and they start to talk very passionately
Right.
about them.
Yeah.
And you can see by how locked in and passionate they get about that, you're like, okay, this person does have a passion and a drive here, because we're
Right.
talking about something very personal to them, and they get excited about it. And you want to latch onto that and say, okay, these people who have these types of things, or they've told us something a little more about them through getting into more of a personal discussion, helps to know if this is going to be a good culture hire or not. And we've made
Right.
plenty of bad culture hires here. Don't get me wrong, but it is
Yeah.
one of the things we really, really look for.
Yeah, and that I'm glad you gave some more specifics on that, because I do hear that said quite a bit, hiring on culture. Um, it's it's difficult a lot of times for people to kind of convey how they do that, right? Like,
Sure.
is it a gut feeling during the interview? Are there specific questions that you're looking for an outcome in? Um, so it is interesting to hear about the hobbies. Are there any other criteria or measurement tools that you use for that?
I like to talk to people about, what they're going, like what they want from their life, period. Where do you want to wind up? Not even like, where do you see yourself in this many years, but like, where do you want to wind up? What are your ultimate goals? Because I know most people, especially younger people, they're not taking the job because this is their end goal.
Right.
They're taking their job because they want to do this with their life, or, I hire a lot of people who their aspiration is to work a good job so they can do something outside of work,
Right.
right? Like,
Right.
because those people are externally driven to do a good job. They have a situation outside of work that they want to, like, earn money to raise a family, or to, have this certain lifestyle or whatever. And as long as they can do that here, that's their driver. When someone says, my sole drive is like to get this position and then move up to that position and then get into management and stuff, it's like, okay, that's a drive within the company that I would like to see, but it may not be opportunities that I can provide. So I have to recognize the fact that I could lose that person in not a long period of time if they're basically solely driven by their career, because their career is like, the opportunities that exist in a small company are going to be limited to begin with, and timing is everything. So you had to be there at the right time and be the right fit for the job that was there.
Right.
But it is one of those things where you start to see someone who's externally driven. I really like to see that, because that external drive is what is going to allow them, it's going to cause them to want to do more.
Mm.
I had a big external drive coming in. I didn't necessarily have a desire to sell solid state cooling systems. There was no passion in me for that, but I had a big external drive that I wanted to start a family, and I wanted to, like, move in that direction.
Right.
And so it was like, well, I got to keep working, and I got to work hard, because that is going to be what I want to achieve. Whether
Yeah.
I do that in sales or management or something else, that external drive keeps me moving towards that.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that insight, because I honestly have never thought about it that way. I would have never thought of an interview from that perspective. So I think that is very helpful. Um, so why don't you give us a little bit of insight on the actual product? What is solid state cooling, and what applications does it have?
Okay, so solid state cooling, as we do it, is thermoelectric air conditioning, is sort of the more technical term for it. Solid state cooling being that the only moving parts are the fans. So this is a type of air conditioning that uses a technology called either thermoelectric cooling, which uses a principle called the Peltier effect. It's actually a technology that's pretty old. It was discovered in the 1800s. And without getting too deep into the science/wizardry that exists in that, you basically are passing a voltage through two dissimilar metals. Those dissimilar metals are then pumping all of the heat to one side of the device, and the other side gets very cold because of that. So we harness that into the center of an air conditioning system, so we don't have to use Freon or oil-based compressors, or any of those things, with no refrigerants, and we can create an actual drop in temperature that allows us to then cool spaces. That's what it comes down to.
Gotcha.
Now the application of that is typically within the industries we operate in industrial automation, and security, and defense, in those kinds of things, where basically you're taking electronics you're going to put those electronics in adverse conditions, whether that's indoor, outdoor, on a plant floor where there's lots of, chemicals, or, it's very dirty, or you're, out in a desert somewhere, or you're, on an oil rig somewhere where you have this adverse, environment, and you need to maintain a protective, setting for those electronics. And oftentimes electronics create heat. You got to get rid of that heat so we can actively cool without ever ventilating the system. So that's what we do and kind of how it applies.
Yeah, that's very cool. And you told me about the CRAM systems, which is the counter something and artillery.
Counter rocket artillery and mortar.
Yeah.
So we worked on that system. I mean, that goes back about 15 years ago, a little bit more. During the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, we worked with Northrop Grumman. They were developing the CRAM system, which was a system that when insurgents would fire into the bases, this would detect the fire, figure out where it was going to hit, notify and alert that area, simultaneously calculate the trajectory at which it came and return fire, and try to take it out. So it was a multi-step system that happened very, very fast. Seconds, this whole system would work. And so they came to us because they had a problem where their encryption gear was kicking off way too much heat, and they were failing in the field because they were in these cases. They had to be protected because of the sand environment. So we built them cases that were air conditioned, that they could sit out, long term. So we wound up providing them, I think, with over, I think it was 1,700 of these cases over the course of a couple of years.
Wow.
to get them into the theater as quickly as possible. But that was one of our most high profile jobs that we saw.
No, that's awesome.
We were really able to solve a problem for somebody in a short period of time by sort of thinking outside that box. So
yeah, and I mean that system saved a lot of lives for sure.
Yeah. Definitely.
and arguably took a few too, but they were the bad guys. So yeah, that's awesome. So in terms of kind of your market breakdown, you've got that military and defense application. What are the other big kind of sectors there for you?
So industrial automation is a big one. Anytime you have industrial automation, we talk about anything that's going to be existing in a factory, that's going to be, you got switches, servers, PLCs, drives, all these different pieces of equipment, and those all need to be contained and safe. And so instead of building massive equipment rooms that need, really large cooling systems and everything, you can sort of take it down to more component level and make much smaller setups. That's a big one. Oil and gas, anytime you're in, whether it's, drilling, exploration, refining, transport, you have a lot of, equipment that's measuring things and monitoring things. And especially when you get into exploration and drilling, you're talking about some very, nasty environments down there. And so your electronic equipment can't be just out in the environment. So that has to be closed up pretty tight. Certain classifications of equipment, so you can wind up, non-incendiary and those kinds of things. So we operate in that space quite a bit. And then in security, especially in the world of fire panels, because there's a lot of codes that exist in different states and different municipalities where the fire panel has to exist inside an air-conditioned space. And in new constructions, they were finding that it was very costly to air condition these fire panel rooms.
Right.
So they found the workaround was, instead of, putting a 2-ton unit or 5-ton unit on the side of a room to handle these, they could just put it in a small box that was air conditioned and sort of have the hack to work around it. So we do a fair amount of fire panel work as well.
Oh yeah, that's really cool. I wouldn't have thought of that. Huh. So the applications are huge. I mean, there's so many of them.
Sure.
I would assume there's got to be quite a few competitors if there's so many applications for this product. Do you see a lot of that in the US or internationally?
We're certainly not the only game in town, but we do our best to have the most consultative sales approach, so that basically we want to make sure that the customer can come in, speak to one of our team, and really find out what it is they need and how we can do that best. And we're very, we're very big on customization of our products in order to meet the needs of the customer, whether that's, small features or, bigger reworks to really make it match the specific needs of that application,
Hmm.
without, we're obviously not going to reinvent the wheel on that, but we are talking about, some pretty significant customization we can offer so that customers don't just have to shoehorn a solution into their problem.
Right. Yeah, like the CRAM. So you actually provided them the fully assembled case.
Yeah. Yeah, it
Okay.
was the whole case with the integrated air conditioner and everything sealed up, ready to go. And then they had asked for like custom signal entry panels and labeling and marking and everything. So we did the whole thing for
Oh,
them.
wow.
So that way they wouldn't have to send it back out when they got it. They wouldn't have to rework it. It could basically go straight to the integration point where they put all their equipment in, and then it could go straight into the field.
Wow. Yeah, so that's a lot of customization. So I can definitely see how that could be a good. I've talked to a couple people recently that was kind of their exact niche, was being able to do kind of the small run, the very customized work. Um, and as a small company, how many people do you have there?
19.
19. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some bigger players out there. So what in terms of your overall business strategy, what would you say your biggest challenges are? Like if you could rank maybe your top 3 challenges, what would you say they are?
Well, I mean, right now our biggest challenge is like most small businesses and manufacturers are dealing with in the U.S., which is just navigating the volatility of tariffs and supply chains. Right now, that's a huge issue that's daily discussions with us. Whether things are changing and how they're changing, and where we want to put effort and where we can't put effort, and what we want to hold off on, what we want to expedite, all that stuff. That's one of the biggest things. Then the other thing is just general awareness. I mean, you and I are talking here. You've never worked with solid state cooling, and what is that, and how does it apply, and all that is just the general awareness of what we do, and kind of how that would play out for customers, and why they need it.
Right.
There are plenty of people who are aware of solid state cooling, but I think broadly people don't have any idea what it is. So
Right.
that's those two are the biggest things I would say right now. And then you always have just your general challenges of just running a business and trying to maintain profitability, and keeping everything moving in the right direction without getting too bogged down in any one place. Any small company is going to have that issue. So yeah, we see that a lot too.
Right. Yeah, and there's a lot to talk about each one of them. So I'm having a hard time deciding which one to hit. But I'm interested, because I am a marketer, I'm interested in the challenge of awareness. And, when you gave the example of the fire panels, I wonder how many people out there, how many different types of products where, you have a company that manufactures a good product, but there's always a certain segment of their customer base that are using that product in a harsh environment or in an environment in which you need this cooling. And they haven't thought about that yet. They haven't thought about addressing that market. I'm curious how what other examples are out there of that?
Sure. I mean, we deal with customers all the time who have, they've got something, and especially when you get into like the South, like Florida, Louisiana, like those areas that are not only hot but extremely like just wet environments. You get a lot of that. Then anywhere you get desert environments, a lot of sand. So I mean, we talk to customers all the time who have those issues, and the hard thing for us is making ourselves broadly applicable, right? Like in our marketing, not getting so focused on like one particular type of application or one particular industry, but making ourselves broadly applicable to lots of things so people can find us and understand, oh, this can be applied to my thing, whether I have like ticket dispensing, or whether I have, a security system where I have to, sign in or scan in, or fire panels, or, any type of oil and gas, monitoring is mostly what we're doing, monitoring equipment, whether they know off the top, oh, this is where I need to head. It's
Hmm.
hard to keep everything when you work in a very diverse group of, industries. It's very hard to, when you're marketing, to say like, without getting yourself pigeonholed too much into one world, where
Right.
you talk too much about oil and gas, then the fire panel people don't know who you are. You talk too much about defense and the industrial automation, people don't want to talk to you. So you have to keep this very like nebulous discussion about equipment in general and those kinds of
Right.
things. So that is always a challenge, is making it applicable enough to the person that they see this stuff and say, oh yeah, that's me, I need that,
Yeah.
without getting so pointed in one direction that people who are in a different industry, or maybe even something we haven't dealt with before, aren't like, no, that's not me, that's clearly for somebody else.
Right.
So that is a big challenge in marketing specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. And it would be fun to look at the data of it all too, because it would be interesting to see how many people are looking for these like ultra specific applications. Like I have an overheating card reader that I need to deal with versus how to protect electronics in hot environments, the sort of
Sure.
general to specific continuum. Yeah, I'm sure there's a mix of it. I'm sure there's a mix of both of them, but from a marketing standpoint, you want to kind of address the largest search volume, and that's attainable, obviously, things that you can actually rank for. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting challenge. Yeah, it's a fun one though. I love data. I love data mining projects and figuring out how to make something usable out of it.
I think that
So,
is something we'll see AI change a lot of,
y-
is the questions we ask,
yep,
right? Like, instead of saying, what is the equipment, like, how do I cool this, hot equipment or whatever, where in Google or in, Microsoft search or whatever, I feel like I'm always trying to pare back my terminology in
right,
order to keep it as broad as possible.
yep,
But when I get into AI, I think people are much more comfortable like throwing in a whole bunch of specifics and saying,
right,
tell me what to do. So
exactly.
we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, because you have some level of confidence it's going to assimilate all of that information that you put into it and give you a customized response based on that, which it does do a good job of in a lot of cases. But yeah, Google, you kind of anticipate like if I Google this long tail, like how do I do X, Y, or Z, it's just going to pick out three of the most pertinent words and give
Right.
you an answer. Yeah, and AI is changing a lot in the search world. I've been doing search engine optimization, primarily focused on Google for about 15 years. And really within the past year, I've seen a dramatic change in, I would say almost a drop off in the Google search traffic, but it doesn't necessarily equate to a drop off in overall traffic. Essentially, what I'm seeing is a lot of people are transitioning from Google search to AI. Now, AI still needs to pull from search,
Right.
but it's looking for different information than Google was looking for with that search query. And, just as a personal example, with my company, I noticed that there were some terms I wanted to rank for and I wasn't ranking for them. So I went into Chat GPT and I was looked at all the companies that they listed, and then I looked at all their references. So where they pulled the information out from to give me this answer. And I noticed that they were pulling a lot of these like top 10 lists, because I Google what's the best, SEO company for manufacturers. And they would go to clutch.co and, they have a top 10 industrial agencies. And then this other website is top 10 manufacturing. And so it's a pretty simplistic approach, but that's what they seem to be doing. So
Yeah.
I think my best advice for companies that are dealing with loss of traffic from AI is just start searching on AI and see who comes up, see where AI is getting their answers from, and make sure you be there.
Right. Yeah. That, and I think having more long form content that AI can mine, and
Yep.
especially when people are asking specific questions,
Yep.
because then it shows you as a reference to like why, you have a blog post, you have a, white paper or something that it can search and say, here's information regarding that topic right here,
Yep.
as opposed to here's some keywords that, it's because it can actually analyze the whole string. So it's a little
Right.
bit different of an animal. So
No, I agree with that. And honestly, that's where the SEO best practices of the past 5 years have kind of flowed into AI neatly, and why we really haven't been hit too hard in general with our customers and whatnot is we've been writing these long form blog articles that are very informative, answer a lot of questions about the topic. And so we end up in a lot of those kind of like AI snippets at the top of search and stuff because of that stuff. So So yeah, those are just some strategies I think would be
Sure.
valuable for some of the other listeners for sure. So, what is the most difficult or surprising aspects to becoming the CEO after some of your previous responsibilities?
Um, so I think one of the most difficult things, I mean, I feel like I have a pretty good relationship with most of my team here. I don't feel like I have like any sort of an adverse relationship with anybody. So there was an aspect that I was really like, will they will they see me as the leader
Mm,
now since
yep.
I've been one of them for so long?
Right.
And I think there was some people who leaned heavily into it because I had been, at different times, different levels of management. So they had grown to trust me to know that, my work was solid. I was going to be able to give them good answers and I wasn't just going to, blow them off or anything. So once I got to this position, I was, they had already built that, we'd already built that trust. Other people, I think, maybe resented me a bit. They
Right.
felt like, that's unfair that you got an opportunity that I didn't get. And those people didn't stick around for a long time, which wasn't surprising given the situation. But
Which
I
wasn't
think there
surprising given I fired him. No.
but it is one of those things where I think people look at it and they want to they want you to do well because they want the company to do well. But sometimes personal feelings get in the way. So there is that. But that was a big challenge, I think, really trying to get everybody on board. And then, one of the things that's also pretty challenging, if you have to shift gears, but the people who were in leadership before are kind of still around,
Mhm.
um, you don't ever want to paint the picture like you guys didn't know what you were doing.
Right.
Because if they didn't know what they were doing, honestly, they're probably not around. So then you don't really have to worry about that. But if it's a smooth transition and that person's still around on a consulting level, you do have to be able to like speak plainly about things that weren't working without insulting people. And
Mhm.
that's pretty tough to do. Now,
Yeah.
I came in with a very, again, I recognize it's sort of a non standard situation. Like most people, when they come into a position like this, don't have 15 years, not only in the industry that they're working in, but in the company. So they know all of the ups and downs and the highs and lows and like what needs to change and what needs, what's been a huge problem, what hasn't. Someone in my position typically is going to come in and start from scratch and start to learn all that right away. But I had the advantage of being able to do that. So that was very helpful. But it was difficult to manage sort of like the people side. How do I hold people to the standard that I need them held to when I've been, their coworker and their
Right.
friend? How can I get them to respect me at the level I need them to respect me at now?
Right.
So that was a big challenge. It took me a little while. Thankfully, the silver lining of a horrible situation, I was, made CEO 2 weeks before COVID hit the US. So everybody was sort of in this state of turmoil and like, what are we going to do next? So it was sort of anybody who was saying something positive, it was like, okay, we're going to follow you. So
Right.
it did give me a little bit of a leverage there, as crazy of a situation as that was. I
Yeah.
was able to sort of leverage that into like having people sort of follow me along and go through that whole situation together. So
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I am familiar with that challenge. Especially like being in the Marine Corps, it's something that happens all the time where you get promoted and suddenly all the other, PFCs that you were peers with, now all of a sudden you're, supposed to be telling them what to do. And that happens with every rank. Um, and so like I think the fact that you were already respected, like you mentioned, and that people knew that you were going to make the right decisions and knew what you were talking about is probably the largest piece of that challenge. Solving it. Were there any other strategies? Ways that you dealt with that. Like if you had a specific person you can think of that did not seem to want to get on board but was still an asset to the company, how did you deal with that?
sure. So typically, I mean, I try to treat everyone as an individual and like recognize the fact that they've got life outside of work and things outside of work. So I don't necessarily know day to day like what every single person is going through, and I can't know that. I can't know all about their personal life and their kids and their spouses and like what's going on. But I try to make myself available in a sense of like, especially early on, really meeting with people and pitching the vision. Look, guys, we've been doing this for this long. A lot of people who worked here have worked here for a long time. It's a pretty common story around here. And so, I would get some of these people and say, look, I know that you've been here maybe even longer than I have, but here I am. I'm in this position now. Let me tell you what I want to see here. Let me tell you what I think this could be.
Yep.
And kind of give them the space to walk through that with me instead of just like, hey guys, as a group, here's my whole new regiment of rules and regulations and plans. And, this is what we're doing. But really give them the freedom to talk to me, to sit down and one-on-one, ask them what their goals are. Because sometimes people will work for you. Again, we talked about this in the interview, like what are you driven by and all that stuff in the early process of it. But once someone's been here for 3-4 years, that may have changed some. So being able to get that update, being able to say to somebody like, oh, where are you at now? Like what's on, like what do you want to see happen in the next, 3 to 4 years as you're here,
Yeah.
And some people, you're going to be able to meet them there. You're going to be able to talk to them, and you're really going to be able to find a common ground and an understanding of like, this is where we want to wind up. Other people, you're going to talk to them and you're going to recognize pretty quickly, like our goals are very misaligned. Like we
Right.
do not have the same thing here. You are very clearly talking about something that I am not capable of giving you, or you have expectations that are never going to be able to be met, at this place. So, you do recognize that pretty quickly. And I also like to, even in that moment, tell that person like, listen, I don't think we're going to be able to do what you want here, but I think you still bring value. So if you can hang on and maybe shift some of the things you're looking for, I think we can still use you. But if you can't, like, I get that too. Like, if you need to move on, let's talk about it. And let me give you a letter of reference. Let me let's do this amicably.
Right.
If that's where you want to head. But if you don't, I think you still have a lot of value to bring here. And I try to be very honest with people in that way. And at that time, it was very like we were having a lot of conversations with individuals and, just here's what we're doing and here's why we're doing it, because I was the only one who knew this was happening while it was happening. Like I was the only one who was aware that this run up was about to go down, besides the person who was in the position and, the board of directors. Everybody else had no clue. So it was kind of a shock for everyone else, even though for me it was about 18 months of like talking through things and, planning and everything else.
Yeah.
So when we actually got to the point, I really did have to sit down with a lot of people who were fairly shocked about what had just gone down and just sort of let them know, like, look, I'm on your side. We're all on the same team here. I'm not out to like, just like blow this whole thing up now because now it's my chance to run it. And one day you were mean to me at lunch, It's like, we're here to like run a company,
Right.
So it was definitely a struggle at first and kind of an uphill climb. I was learning a lot of things in real time, but that was how I handled it. And that did help to sort of lay the groundwork with the people who did stick around. I feel like we have a really great relationship and we've really like been able to make everything work through, ups and downs, because we built that foundation.
Yep. No, I really respect that approach. Kind of that people first approach and being, just a more open leadership style. I think that's a great piece of advice as well. So I like to kind of end the podcast with a little segment called "What Do You Need?" So, are there any challenges in this space right now, whether it be on the production side of things, sourcing certain components, knowledge you're looking for? Are there any resources out there that you have been looking for or had your eye on?
So one of the things that I think is very difficult, and I think anyone who works HMLV type manufacturing, which is high mix, low volume, for those who don't know, which means you're not building tons of any one thing, you're building lots of things in smaller batches. When you do that and you do it at a niche level, right, you have a very specific product that does a very specific thing that isn't going to be widely applicable to lots and lots and lots of people. It's very hard to build an outbound sales team. That is one thing I think we've always struggled with. It's like
Yep.
inbound sales, you can create marketing, you can create these things, but can you create an outbound sales team?
Yep.
And I've been reading a lot about scaling sales teams and those kinds of things. So that is one area that I think I would personally love to know more about, scaling a sales team, especially in the outbound world of something where it's talking about niche manufacturing. That's a
Yeah, that's
difficult
very
area.
interesting.
I think most people don't have an expertise in that, but I know there's one guy out there that does,
Yep.
and he probably knows a whole lot.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I know some people. Well, yeah, I'll chat with you a little bit about that. There's some, obviously I've attempted to build an outbound sales team for my company in the past. One of my big challenges, which I'm sure is very similar to yours, is I'm the one who knows everything about what we do.
Sure.
Everything, right? And it's difficult to find somebody that can relate to a potential client to the degree to which I can, because I do care. Like, I care about what they do. I'm interested to hear and learn about it and figure out what the solution is. So yeah, it is very difficult to find that skill set. It's possible, but then the other challenge is management.
Right.
So I'm a good salesperson because I'm consultative and because I care, but I am not a sales manager. I cannot manage salespeople. I can't say I'm the most like detailed. You have to be very detailed oriented and be able to track everything and make very small incremental increases in how well you're closing deals and all that. I can't do that. So that's the other challenge too, is like if you hire one salesperson, you really need to hire two because you need somebody to
Right.
manage. So yeah, it's interesting. Cool. All right. Well, yeah, that's good. Yeah, I like to throw that in there because if there's somebody out there listening that's like, oh, I'm the perfect dude for that job, or I can link them up with somebody that would be helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Josh, thanks a lot for joining today. Really enjoyed our conversation. It didn't even go the direction. I didn't cover like most of what I thought I was going to cover because we just got into some other interesting topics that you had good insight in. So that was fun. But thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. It was great to be here.